Welcome back to Speducation. My name is Brandon Reed, and I will be your host for today. The past couple of weeks, we've been talking about different parts of an IEP and what those parts mean and how they relate to the overall completion of the IEP. So this week, we're going to continue that talk. So let's dive into today's lesson. Today's topic is parts of an IEP, week 3. Today, we are going to be looking at accommodations. What are accommodations and how do they relate to the overall completion of the IEP? And then we'll also be looking at goals. And specifically, we're going to be talking about SMART goals. And what are SMART goals? Well, you can kind of figure it out here. They're goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So let's dive in. Accommodations. So when we talk about an IEP, one of the sections of the IEP is called the accommodations page. In the accommodations page, we basically look at the types of accommodations that a student will receive while they're in school. And there are two types. There's ones that are used in the general ed classroom for general ed assignments and for, presentations, classwork, group work, etc. And then you have testing accommodations. And 90% of the time, the general ed accommodations that are in the classroom will be the same as for the testing accommodations, with some slight differences. So on the accommodations page, the first thing that we need to put down is the anticipated date of graduation. Then we look at participation in state testing programs. So there are a couple of different options here. The first is student does not attend an accredited school and will not participate in statewide assessments. It's very rare. In fact, in all of my 15 years of teaching, I have never really seen that before. But if that were the case, then you would mark that. And then you would skip the rest of it because, again, the student will not be attending school and will not participate in statewide assessments. The next section the next part is student will not yet be in grade 3. State assessments don't typically start until the student enters grade 3. So if the student's not in grade 3, you don't have to worry about state assessments or accommodations. Now, if the student is in grades 3 through 8, then the student has a couple of different choices. One, they will participate in an alternate assignment, and that may be because their disability requires that. And even if it is an alternate assignment, they will still get some form of accommodation. Or the student will participate in the state assessment and will still get accommodations. That's down here. If the student participates in the state assessment, then you will acknowledge, does the student get accommodations or will the student not use accommodations? And there are some students, and I have had students where they do have accommodations in the general ed setting, but they do fine on tests, so they don't need testing accommodations. It's rare, but it does happen. And you have to indicate that on this page. If the student has an alternate assessment, then you will mark that, and that will be for those subjects as well. Now, for those students that are in high school, the only state test that they really have to take in high school is in 10th grade. And typically it used to be iLearn, iStep. Now I believe it's like SAT or ACT. So if they are in high school in 10th grade, then they will need these testing accommodations for the state test. And again, they will either take the state test or they will take an alternate assessment. And the same as before, they will either have accommodations or they will not have accommodations. Okay. Now for here, it also says that the student has already passed this assessment, so they don't need to worry about participation in that, or the student is not yet in the course of study, or the student has participated in this assessment. These are the types of accommodations that one would get for state tests. And as you can see, there is a lot here. I'm not going to go through every single one, okay? Because otherwise this would be an hour-long video. But what I will say is that the majority of the time, the top 3 state assessment accommodations that are there is small group, test read aloud, and extended time. Those are typically the top three. Any more than that, then it depends on the student's needs. Sometimes you may have students that require a calculator. Sometimes you may have a student that requires extra breaks, okay? Or if they're bilingual, they may need a bilingual word-to-word dictionary, okay? It just depends on the individual and what their needs are. The state test that this covers is iLearn or iStep, NWEA, WIDA, which is a language test, IM, iRead, etc. Okay. This would also apply to SAT and ACT test as well. And then, of course, these are some additional accommodations in here, such as changing the size and color of the mouse pointer, point on demand for online testing, closed captioning for online audio items, etc. So these are some of the additional accommodations. If there are accommodations that are not listed, such as maybe a hot pass, the student has access to the resource room, then you want to put that in here as well, because then we know specifically, okay, for this test, this is what they need to have, okay? And again, the accommodations are pretty thorough, but sometimes there are some accommodations that are written specifically for the student that are not listed in the testing. And then, of course, you're going to describe the plans for participation in other local, national, and international testing. So any kind of test that they take, if they are allowed accommodations, that is where you would put this in here. And you would state what form of accommodations that they would get. So that you would say something like, the student will participate in all local, national, and international testing with the approved accommodations. Now, this is only specifically for students that are in grade 3, okay? Because grade 3, that's when state accommodations or standardized assessments start. And so for grade 3, it's the iRead 3. And if your student has an IEP, then this is what you would see if they were in grade 3, okay? So you would mark, did the student pass iRead 3, yes or no, okay? And then if they choose no, and they did not pass, will the student be retained? Okay, if the student is to be retained, will he or she receive remediation? If the student did not pass iRead 3 and is not retained, explain the rationale for not retaining the student. And that might be something as simple as the student is, too old to be in that grade level. Okay, or they're socially above the rest of the students in that grade level. Sometimes you can get waivers, and in that case, they will allow you to move on. Okay, especially if you have an IEP and you really struggle with reading comprehension, that might be one of the ways that they waiver. And then, of course, you have to present the rationale, explain why the chosen assessments are appropriate for the student. So you have to explain, why are these accommodations appropriate? And you have to relay it back to the student's disability, because if they have a reading comprehension, okay, and you're providing these accommodations, you have to explain this is specifically why. All right, now let's move on to goals. So when you get to the goals section of the IEP, it will look something like this. The first thing that you have to fill out is the title, okay? So what is the title goal? And if a student has a specific learning disability, and let's say they have a reading comprehension goal, okay, there are many reasons why the student may have reading comprehension issues, okay? It may be due to the fact that they aren't able to decode the information in the reading, in the passage. Okay, they have trouble decoding words. It may be that they're dyslexic. It may be that the student really struggles with being able to identify the main ideas. Okay, so this is where you would put that. You wouldn't just say reading comprehension. You would say reading comprehension, and then you would put specifically what it is that the student has struggles with in reading comprehension. And then you would present the present level data for this annual goal, okay? basically what is the student, how's the student currently doing? Then you would put the standards related to the goal, and then you would put the specifically designed instruction. Okay, what specifically are you going to do to help this student reach that goal? And it has to be specific because you have to be able to measure it. Okay, and then lastly, you would put the annual goal statement. Okay, what does the goal actually say? If a student is of transition age, then obviously you're going to need a transition goal to put in there, especially if they have difficulty with independent living skills. You would need a goal for that. The method and instrumentation for measuring progress. This is where you're going to put, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to measure that goal? And so that goal will be measured either through teacher reports, through data tracking, okay, through teacher created assessments. However, you're going to measure that goal, you're going to put that in there. And then you have to use those methods in order to determine whether or not the student is meeting the goal. And then, of course, you have the annual goal initiation date. You have the annual goal completion date. And typically that is 1 year from when we hold the IEP case conference. So if it was August 28th, 2023, then the goal completion date should be August 28th, 2024. Now, if the student completes the goal before that date, then at the next annual case conference, you can update it, or you could update it throughout the year. You could tell the parent that the student has met this goal, and either we need to revise it or we can drop the goal. And in that case, you would need to do a revision conference. But typically, these goals are written so that it's kind of like a long-term goal, so that the student, will be able to reach this goal by the time of his next annual case conference. And then, of course, articulate the plan to monitor and report progress on this goal. You're going to explain how you're going to progress monitor this goal, when the progress monitoring will go out to the parent, etc. This is typically done once every 9 weeks. Okay. Sometimes you will have goals that require it to be done once a week or once every 2 or 3 weeks. But generally, 90% of the time, you'll find that goals are done once every 9 weeks. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. So next week, we'll talk about provisions section. And if you're wondering what provisions means, it basically means the special ed services. What are the services that we provide to the student? And then related services section, that talks about special ed services as well. And if you liked what you saw, please click the like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to post in the comments. And until next time, class dismissed.